Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today I have a story for you. On the continent of Terracier, on the plain of Dominaria, decades before the Brothers' War of Urza and Mishra, a great bear of a man named Feldon grew up at the foot of the Rhonim Glacier. He became an archaeologist and glaciologist, investigating and studying the artifacts which emerged from the glacier's meltwater. One of those was an ancient walking cane, which helped with his weak leg, and the runes it bore inspired Feldon to learn languages and, later, magic. In Terracia City, he helped to found the Union of the Third Path, a group of magical researchers who refused to ally themselves with the burgeoning forces of either Urza or Mishra. When the Golgothian Silex was retrieved from glacial meltwater and delivered to Feldon, he began to work with Lauren, a scholar from Argive and one of his co-founders in the Union. Their shared interest in arcane relics led them to working quite closely. But the power of the Silex was too much of a temptation for the warring brothers, whose antipathies were coming to a head, and Mishra sent his forces to lay siege to Terracia City. Feldon urged Lauren to escape with the Silex under the cover of a sandstorm, claiming his weak leg would only slow her down. He convinced her to leave to protect the Silex, but I believe his real motive was to keep her safe. Best laid plans, for before Lauren could meet Feldon at the Rhonim Glacier, she was injured and captured by Mishra's apprentice and lieutenant, Ashnod. Ashnod tortured and interrogated Lauren, keeping the scholar imprisoned and learning all she knew about the Silex. But after long years, Lauren was able to escape, and Ashnod did not pursue her. Lauren reunited with Feldon, and at last they married. They lived in a cottage near the Rhonim Glacier, their fears and worries at last put to rest. And even the detonation of the Silex years later could not touch them at first. But after a decade, the combination of age, the tortures she suffered at the hands of Ashnod, and the cooling climate of the oncoming Ice Age were enough to claim Lauren's life. She died in her sleep as Feldon sat beside her. So great was his grief that Feldon set out on a quest to return her to life. With his belief in the power of magic, he knew there had to be a way. He traveled the continent, searching ceaselessly, learning the use of each color of magic one by one as he processed his loss. When he at last learned white magic, he was able to summon a copy of the memory of his wife, which allowed him a final chance to tell her goodbye. Feldon's is a sad, sweet story, and it's echoed in his card. He is an artificer who can return a creature to life as a simulacrum, albeit only for a moment. He insists that Lauren will return to him, and in his reflection, we can see the kiss that he longs to give to her. I love this card and the story behind it, something perfect for telling in front of a fire during this time of year. I thank you all for listening. But let's lift our spirits. This is a holiday deck, and it isn't named I Miss You Most at Christmas Time. With his red coat and white beard, Feldon looks a bit like a famous old toy maker. So that's the theme of what I've built here. He reaches into the woodpile of our graveyard and crafts artifact toys for our friends at the table. Those toys have haste, so we can gift them to our opponents in the form of the attack step. And since his ability doesn't exile the original creature from our graveyard, we can do this over and over because it's always the season for giving. This is an updated version of a personal deck of mine, one I only ever play during December. Mono Red Artifact Reanimator is a lot of fun, and I've included a few cards just to keep the flavor of the jolly old elf. Besides, it gives me a chance to tell Feldon's story to interested opponents while we shuffle up, which feels like I'm helping to keep his quest alive for a little longer. You'll enjoy this deck if you like silly themes that, when they get going, are no laughing matter, or if you like bringing a bit of holiday cheer to your commander pods as you dish out some season's beatings. So, before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around the commander, especially decks like this one, which means that I want to show off why they're cool and why I put them in the command zone. So 30 cards go toward doing whatever they want me to do. That's our game plan. It's what we try to do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go toward supporting that game plan in the 3 categories I have here of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction. I usually run 1 or 2 sweepers, just in case I need to clear the board and open a path for my victory. Sometimes I'll run more if it would play into the game plan of the commander, sometimes none at all, but I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands because I want to make sure I hit my land drops and I can cast my spells. So let's take a closer look at our commander. Feldon of the Third Path is a 2/3 legendary human artificer for 1 and double red, with 1 ability. For For 2 and a red and tap, we can create a token that's a copy of target creature card in our graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, and then at the end step, we sacrifice it. So Feldon wants us to get creatures in our graveyard so that we can make more of them every time, and we can share these toys with our friends by attacking them with them. So lots of fun. So let's start by looking at, first, the kind of creatures we want to send toward our friends, the kind of toys we want to make. In a section I'm calling big ones. These are creatures that have mana value 4 or greater, because Feldon only costs 3 in tap to make a token copy of it, so we're getting a little bit of advantage by making a copy of something bigger than 3 mana. Starting with Atsushi, the Blazing Sky. This is a 4/4 legendary dragon spirit for 2 and double red. Atsushi has flying and trample, and when it dies, we either exile the top 2 cards of our library, and until end of turn we can play them, or we make 3 treasure tokens. So the idea is, we get this into our graveyard, we make a copy of it with Feldon, and we know that it's going to die either because of interactions in combat, or because when we get to the end step, we're going to have to sacrifice it. So when we do, we usually make 3 treasure tokens, because that's 3 mana that we already paid into making the copy of it with Feldon's ability. So we're getting a little bit of a rebate here. It's also fine if we need to get a little card advantage as well. Next is Solemn Simulacrum. Great in most decks, but particularly good in this one, because we're mono red, so we really want ramp. This is a 2/2 artifact creature golem for 4 generic mana, and when it enters, it rampant growths, meaning we get to search our library for a basic land, we put it on the battlefield tapped, and we shuffle. So it just goes and finds us a mountain, and we can use it next turn. And when it dies, we can draw a card. So the sad robot, if we get it into our graveyard, we've probably done that by discarding it, or maybe it died and we drew a card from it. But then we make a copy of it with Feldon, it'll come in, it'll ramp us, and then it'll die, and we can draw again. And we can keep doing this over and over, and it's usually worth doing. Next up is Clone Shell. This is really fun in this deck. 5 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature shapeshifter with an imprint ability. It says when it enters, we look at the top 4 cards of our library, exile one of them face down, and put the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. And when the Clone Shell dies, we take the exiled card and we turn it face up. And if it's a creature, we put it right onto the battlefield. So that means in our deck that is running 35 creatures, one of which is our commander and one of which is Clone Shell, but that means 33 creatures among the other 98 in our deck. So it's pretty likely that we're going to look at the top 4 and find a creature spell among them. If we don't, that's okay. But if we do, we've got a creature spell, we know that Clone Shell is going to die because we're going to find a way to sacrifice it, it's going to sacrifice itself because it's a copy token that we made from Feldon, or we're just going to let our opponents kill it, or we'll jump block with it or something, and then we'll be able to get that creature that we exiled under it and put it on the battlefield. We've got a lot of big creatures we'd like to do that with. And then we can do this over and over as we make copies of the Clone Shell and keep getting more and more creatures out. We can whiff with it. It might be the case that we look at the top 4 and we don't see any creatures, but that's okay. Honestly, having one of these cards exiled face down forever, or rather it gets it turned face up, but we don't get to get it out of exile if it's not a creature, that's not really that different from it being one of the ones we put on the bottom of our library, in the case that we probably won't see it, assuming we don't get a shuffle effect. So it's sort of all upside for us. Next is Daretti Rocketeer Engineer. 4 and a red for a star 5 legendary Goblin Artificer. Love Daretti. Daretti's got a great story. Daretti's power is equal to the greatest mana value among artifacts we control, which doesn't just mean artifact cards, it means any of the copy tokens we've made of creatures in our graveyard thanks to Feldon, because those are artifacts as well. And the mana value, and the mana cost even, of a card that is copied, that's a copyable copyable quality. So if we were to make a copy of, let's say, Inferno Titan, it's still going to have a mana cost, the copy is, of 4 and double red, which means Daretti is going to see 6 mana value among the artifacts we control, since that copy is an artifact as well. So Daretti will be a 6/5. Pretty good. In addition, whenever Daretti enters or attacks, we can do this 2 times, or more if we attack more, of course. We choose an artifact in our graveyard, and we can sacrifice an artifact in play, and if we do, we return the chosen card in the graveyard to the battlefield. So this is very nice, because if we have artifact cards in our graveyard, and we have any artifacts in play, including a copy token that Feldon has made, which is itself an artifact, Daretti entering or attacking can let us sacrifice the artifact in play to get the actual artifact card in our graveyard back onto the battlefield. This is very nice because we can do this after combat by having Duretti enter after combat. So maybe we use Feldon to make a copy of a big creature in our graveyard. It comes in as an artifact creature. We attack with it, assuming it survives combat. We play Duretti, we cast Duretti after combat. Duretti enters, we get to choose an artifact in our graveyard and sacrifice that artifact creature that Feldon made, and we get the artifact in our graveyard back. We can also have this happen if we're not willing to attack with that artifact creature token that we made with Feldon, because Duretti can get this trigger by attacking as well. So this would be happening before we get to do any damage with the attack from our copy token, but still we're able to reanimate an artifact by sacrificing the copy. It's also the case that this may be Duretti himself. Maybe Duretti is in the graveyard. We use Feldon to make a copy of him. Duretti will enter. We can choose an artifact in our graveyard and then sacrifice the Duretti copy that we just made, and we'll get the artifact in our graveyard directly back into play. We don't have to do it then either, or we don't have to do it with Duretti then, because Duretti, if we've made a copy of him with Feldon, has haste. So we can get his enters trigger, sacrifice a different artifact to reanimate an artifact in our graveyard, then attack with Duretti. This will trigger a second time, and at that point, we sacrifice Duretti and reanimate a different artifact in our graveyard. There's a lot of cool sequencing choices you can make with Duretti. They're not all perfect, but with the exception of one or two, there's so many good ones in here. Yeah, I like this card in this deck. Next is Ilarg the Razeboar from War of the Spark. 6/6, legendary boar god for 3 and double red with trample. 6/6 trample for 5, yeah, we're already there. And when Ilarg attacks, you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Return that creature to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So we get to sneak attack with it, and it bounces at the end step. So any kind of big creature we have, or a creature that has some kind of enters triggered that we might want to take advantage of, like Duretti maybe, Ilarg can just put it into the battlefield tapped and attacking. Now it does not get any attack triggers because it's put on the battlefield attacking after Ilarg is attacked. That means this is post the declare attackers. It's part of the declare attacker step, but it's not a moment where the creature we put into play has been declared as an attacker. So any triggers that say on that creature, when this creature attacks, will not trigger. But any abilities that say when this creature enters, they will. So yeah, and we'll be able to get it back, assuming it doesn't die. And if it does die, it doesn't really matter because it'll go to our graveyard, and we can always make copies of it with Feldon later on. The same is true for Ilarg. Just think about paying 3 mana and tapping Feldon, getting Ilarg back, and then getting something out from our graveyard when that Ilarg creature copy attacks. In addition, when Ilarg dies or is put into exile from the battlefield, we may put it into its owner's library, third from the top. Oftentimes we won't, because we kind of want Ilarg to die. If Ilarg is on the battlefield, we want it to just end up in our graveyard so we can make copies of it. But if someone removes the original Ilarg or exiles it somehow, and we don't want to lose it forever, we can always just put it third from the top of our library and we'll get it back soon. Next is Ox of Agonis. 3 and double red for a 4/2 Ox that says when it enters, we discard our hand and we draw 3 cards. We have a couple of different effects like this, these sort of wheels or mini wheels that let us discard cards. We want cards in our graveyard, and because we're running 35 creatures, is that right? Yeah, 35 creatures. We want to be able to get as many into our graveyard as possible, so we have lots of options for what we want to make copies of with Feldon. So Ox of Agonis lets us get our whole hand into the graveyard and then replace it with 3 cards. Usually pretty good, even if we end up with fewer cards than we started with. In addition, the Ox can be escaped. That means we can cast it from our graveyard rather than by paying 3 and double red, we just pay double red and we exile 8 cards from our graveyard, 8 other cards. So that doesn't seem like it's great if we're trying to reanimate things, but we can always exile things that aren't creatures, or creatures that we don't really need if we're really excited to get the Ox back into play. For example, maybe we have a couple of small creatures in our graveyard that we don't mind exiling to get the Ox back into play because we have a big creature in our hand, and when the Ox enters, we will discard our hand, draw 3 new cards, and now we can activate Feldon to copy one of the creatures we discarded with the Ox. In addition, The Ox escapes with a +1/+1 counter on it. So if we escape it, it's a 5/3. Finally, if the Ox is in our graveyard, we don't have to escape it. We can just activate Feldon and make a copy of it. It will enter, that copy will enter as a 4/2, and will let us discard our hand and draw 3 again. So yeah, we're all set on that. Next is Perforos Bronze-Blooded, also from Theros Beyond Death. 4 and a red for a 7/6 legendary enchantment creature god with indestructible. Very nice. However, Perforos has this ability, as long as our devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature. Devotion means we count up the number of red pips among permanents we control, and that is our devotion to red. So if we have, let's say, these 8 cards in play, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 devotion to red, because all of these red cards are contributing either 1 or 2, and Steel Exemplar, Clone Shell, and Solemn Simulacrum are not contributing anything. So that would mean Perforos, when it's in play, would be a creature. If our devotion to red drops below or just isn't at 5, then Perforos is simply a legendary enchantment. It is not a creature and it's not a god at that point. However, whether Perforos is a creature or not, Perforos is indestructible, Perforos grants all of our other creatures haste, and Perforos has this ability. For 2 and a red, we can put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from our hand onto the battlefield, and then we sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So most of our creatures are either artifacts or are red. We have a couple of Eldrazi in this, which are colorless non-artifact creatures, so we wouldn't be able to sneak them in with Perforos, but everything else, pretty much fair game. And if we reanimate Perforos, assuming Perforos is able to remain a creature because our devotion is high enough, or if we just play Perforos, either way, we have a 7/6 indestructible creature that we can slam in with. And if it's a copy, it also has haste thanks to Feldon. Pretty good. Next is Steel Exemplar. I love this card in this deck. 5 generic mana for a 4/4 artifact creature wizard with trample. So a 4/4 trample. But in this deck, actually it's a Colossal Dreadmaw, because it enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, unless 2 or more colors of mana were spent to cast it. Our deck is going to spend red mana or colorless mana. Either way, colorless mana isn't a color, so we're always going to be spending 1 or 0 mana, with 0 colors of mana that is, to cast this, so it's always going to come in with the counters. Likewise, if it's in the graveyard and Feldon makes a copy of it, it will enter with 2 counters on it because it wasn't cast at all. So it wasn't cast with 2 or more colors of mana spent to cast it. It wasn't because it will enter with 2 counters no matter what, because it wasn't cast at all, so it wasn't cast with 2. Yeah, I said it right. Yeah, good job, me. Got there. Either way, a Colossal Dreadmaw, isn't that exciting? Unless you've played with it before, it can get really out of hand. A 6/6 trample can do lots of work, especially when you don't care if it lives. Because that's the trick with Feldon. It doesn't matter if your creatures live or die, because these are just copy tokens. We don't mind if they are going to die. We can always make more copies of them. And the original creatures, we don't mind if they die either, because they go to the graveyard and we can now make copies of them. So either way, we want to slam in and do as much damage as we can. In addition, Feldon, I'll call it out right here, Feldon's ability does not say activate at sorcery speed or activate only on your turn. So if we keep Feldon untapped, or he becomes untapped, during an opponent's turn, we can do his ability right then. Imagine being in your opponent's turn, and all we have is our commander, a little 2/3, and our opponent attacks with a big 5/5. In response, we activate Feldon, make a copy of Steel Exemplar, it comes in as a 6/6 trample, and we just eat whatever they attacked us with. Just really nice. I like it. Speaking of 6/6 creatures, this is the Combustible Gearhulk. It's a 6/6 first strike artifact creature construct for 4 and double red. It does so much for us in this deck. When the Combustible Gearhulk enters, target opponent may have us draw 3 cards. So just a free Ancestral Recall with our 6/6 first strike seems pretty good. And if they don't want us to do that, then we just mill 3 cards. And then the Gearhulk does damage to that person equal to the total mana value of the 3 cards we milled. We have such big cards in our deck. So if our opponent knows that at all, they know that us milling 3 cards, it might be that we mill 3 mountains, yeah, and they don't take any damage. It might be that they're taking 25 damage from that. Is it worth it to pay 25 life to prevent us from drawing 3 cards? Not everyone will say so. So a lot of the time, we're going to get a free bonus card draw off of this. And the rest of the time, our opponents are probably going to take some good damage. Love the Gear Hulk. Duplicant is next. Duplicant is another 6 mana artifact. This is a shapeshifter creature. It's a 2/4, and it has Imprint. When it enters, we may exile target non-token creature. We don't want to hit our own stuff. We want to hit our opponent's worst creatures. The biggest, the scariest, or just their commanders. As long as it's not a token and it's a creature, we can hit it. It's exiled forever. And as long as a card exiled with this creature is a creature card, the Duplicant has power and toughness and creature types of the last creature card exiled with it, but it's still a shapeshifter. So this is not an Oblivion Ring effect. That creature that's exiled, it doesn't come back when the Duplicant leaves the battlefield. So if this is in our graveyard, we're paying 2 and a red and tapping our commander to make a copy of the Duplicant and just exiling a creature from our opponent's boards forever. And we get the nice bonus that as long as we've got our Duplicant in play, it's got the same power, toughness, and types as that creature exiled. So we can certainly swing in with it. And if it was the biggest, scariest creature on the board, then we would probably want to. Seems good. Repeatable removal. Next up is Etali Primal Storm. I love that Etali is like 15 cents now. 4 and double red for a 6/6 legendary Elder Dinosaur. And when Etali attacks, we exile the top card of each player's library and we may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. That means us too. So everyone flips over the top card of their library, all of those cards go into exile, any of them that are spells, we'll cast them if we can. If we flip over like a counter spell or something, we can't do that. But if we have the ability to cast those spells, we might as well. We're probably going to get something good from our deck. We'll probably get something sweet from at least one other person's deck. And even if everyone flips over a land, well, that's a land that people aren't going to draw. So Etali's doing great work for us, especially because if Etali is in our graveyard, we can make a copy of Etali with Feldon, and Etali will come in with haste. Because that's the biggest disadvantage of Etali. You cast it, it sits there, everyone knows it's going to happen next turn, but everyone's got a turn to remove Etali. Not with Feldon. If we're making copies from our graveyard, that copy is going to be an artifact, and it's going to have haste, so we can go ahead and Etali and attack right away. Next is Inferno Titan. You can't make this deck without Inferno Titan. It's so great. 4 and double red for a 6/6 giant with fire breathing. Pay a red, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Do that as many times as you like. And when it enters or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided as we choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. So that could be 1 damage to 3 things. It could be a lightning bolt, just 3 damage directly to something. And if we're making a copy of this with Feldon, it's going to enter and do this. Then it's going to attack and do it again. We can have marked 6 damage on something even before the Inferno Titan can do combat damage. And when it does its combat damage, we can pump it up. Pretty sweet. Of course, we do have to pump it before it does the damage, just to be clear, but yeah. Next, from Lord of the Rings, is Oliphant. 5 and a red for a 6/4 elephant with trample. That's just a craw worm. And when it attacks, another target creature we control gets +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. So a little power pump, a little bit of evasion, pretty nice to go with our Oliphant attacking. But even better than that is that it has mountain cycling for 1 generic mana, which means while it's in our hand, we can pay 1 and discard it to search for a mountain, put it in our hand, and shuffle. So we do have to reveal it, of course. So that means Oliphant for 1 mana draws us a mountain and puts itself in our graveyard so that we can make copies of it. And those copies, of course, when they attack, are going to get this attack trigger as well. Really like this. Ruin Grinder has something similar going on with it. It's a 7/4 artifact creature construct with Menace for 5 and a red, and it has mountain cycling for 2, so we can do that same trick that we talked about with the Oliphant. Pay 2, draw ourselves a mountain, this goes in the graveyard, immediately make a copy of it with Feldon, etc. And when the Ruin Grinder dies, each player may discard their hand and draw 7 cards. So our Ruin Grinder and our copies of it are going to die, unless our opponents somehow will have a way to exile our creatures, or make it so our creatures go to exile rather than dying. Then yeah, Ruin Grinder is going to get killed, either in combat, or it's going to die from the sacrifice trigger. And when it does, everyone has a chance to discard and draw 7, and we're going to. unless there's something we're desperate to hold onto in our hand, we want to throw away our hand so we can have it in our graveyard so we can reanimate, or make copies of it, I should say, with Feldon, make copies of the creatures in it. And then we get a fresh 7. Sounds great. Imagine doing this during your opponent to the right's second main phase. Like, Feldon's untapped, we Mountain Cycle, then we activate Feldon to bring the Rune Grinder back, then we go to the end step, it's the next end step, the Rune Grinder dies, everyone gets to draw, and after discarding their hand, just seems really fun. Next we have Trumpeting Carnosaur. I love that LCI gave this to us. 4 and double red for a 7/6 dinosaur with trample, and when it enters, we discover 5, which means this is sort of like Cascade. It enters, we flip over cards from the top of our library, technically exiling them, until we find a spell that costs 5 or less. We can then cast that without paying its mana cost, or we can put that card in our hand, and then everything else that we had exiled goes on the bottom of our library in a random order. So I believe that's exactly how Discover works. Let me know in the comments if I got it wrong. In any case, Trumpeting Carnosaur therefore comes with a free extra spell, in that sense. And that'll happen every time it enters, even if it's entering as a token, thanks to Feldon. But how do we get it in our graveyard? Well, it has this ability. For 2 and a red, we can discard it from our hand, and it does 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. So an expensive lightning bolt that also entombs our Carnosaur, and then we can spend this same amount of mana a second time to make a copy of it, and we get a 7/6 trample artifact creature with haste that also discovers 5. So 2 and a red twice happens to be its casting cost. So you decide which way you'd like this to go out. Next is Wormcoil Engine. Love this card. 6 generic mana for a 6/6 artifact creature Phyrexian Worm with Death Touch and Lifelink, and when it dies, it makes 2 halves of itself. It makes 2 3/3 colorless Phyrexian Worm artifact creature tokens. One has Death Touch, one has Lifelink. So it's half of the worm. What's nice is, if we have this die, or it's in our graveyard in any case, we make a copy of it with Feldon, go ahead and attack, or block if we're doing it that way, and then it will die from the sacrifice trigger if it hasn't from combat, and we still get the tokens, and these tokens stick around. So we'll get to have 3 little Phyrexian Worms helping us out, and we'll get more of them every time we make more copies of the Wormcoil Engine with Feldon, and those copies die. Next is Balefire Dragon. I think the most expensive card in our deck, but it's just really nice in this deck. 5 and double red for a 6/6 dragon with flying that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. So that's 6 damage to every creature controlled by the player that we hit with it. That's a board wipe. It doesn't wipe the entire table, but it sure does probably wipe all of the creatures on their board. And if it doesn't, that means they've got some big things, and good for them, But red does board wipes based in damage, so Balefire Dragon is sort of a little baby Wrath. That's not really that little or baby, especially since we can do it over and over. Next is Dragon Mage, another dragon for 5 and double red. This is a 5/5 Dragon Wizard with flying, and it says when it does damage to a player, each player discards their hand and then draws 7 cards. As opposed to the way that Rune Grinder works, which permits everyone to discard their hand, and if they do, they draw 7. Dragon Mage forces everyone to draw 7 after discarding their hand. This is a forced wheel effect. So Dragon Mage might gain a little bit of ire from other players. They might want to use their removal spells on it, which means they sure aren't using them on Feldon, and that sounds great to me. Especially since we're making copies of this. And if they remove the original, we'll just make a copy of the original from the graveyard, and we use that copy to do the same thing. Seems great. But even better is Drakoseth. Man, I love Drakoseth. 4 and triple red for a 7/7 legendary dragon with flying. When Drakoseth attacks, it does 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. This is mandatory. These are optional. But you're gonna do them. Because Drakoseth, it can spit out 4 damage to one target and 3 damage to another and 3 more damage to a third. That's 10 damage that you're spreading out among maybe 3 creatures that your defending player controls. Maybe a planeswalker that they've got sitting out there. Maybe you're going face. So Drakoseth is going to end up doing 11 damage, assuming that it isn't blocked. Maybe you're sending the 4 and 2 3s at other players or their creatures. You're just burninating the countryside, getting rid of creatures and planeswalkers and maybe even players all over the place every time Drakoseth attacks. And if you're making a copy of Drakoseth with Feldon, not only is this happening right away thanks to haste, it only costs you 3 mana. Next is Meteor Golem. Really great in a red deck. Meteor Golem is 7 generic mana for a 3/3 artifact creature golem, and when it enters, we destroy a non-land permanent that an opponent controls. Red struggles to deal with enchantments, so Meteor Golem can take care of that. It can blow up anything as long as it isn't a land. So any kind of problem we may be having at the table, we don't have to wait to just get out our Drakoseth and do damage to creatures and planeswalkers. We can Meteor Golem them if we want. And we can do it over and over if we're making copies of Meteor Golem using Feldon. Next is Mirror Battlesphere. For 7 generic mana, we get a 4/7 artifact creature mirror construct that, when it enters, makes us 4 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature tokens. So it's 7 mana for 5 creatures, 4 1/1s and a 4/7. And when the Battlesphere attacks, we can tap any number of mirror we control. If we do, this creature gets a power bonus equal to the number of mirror we attacked, and it does that amount of damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking. So this comes in the first time, we make 4 mirror, we attack with this, it gets +4/+0, so it's an 8/7, and it does 4 damage to whatever we're attacking. But imagine if we're making copies of this using Feldon. The Battlesphere will come in, all the things I just said happen. We get 4 tokens, it gets the bonus, it does damage. Then the Battlesphere goes away, but the mirrors stick around. So the next time we make a copy of this, it's going to make 4 more mirror. We attack with it, we tap all 8 of those mirror, and now it's a 12/7, and it's doing 8 damage directly to the player or planeswalker we're attacking. We can just keep doing that. The sphere will roll over everyone. It's great. Next we have Spawn of Thraxus from Journey into Nyx. 5 and double red for a 5/5 dragon. We've seen this before. It flies, and when it enters, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of mountains we control. At any target means we can hit creatures and planeswalkers with it if we want to, or battles, I suppose. But we want to go face with this thing a lot of the time. And we're going to have so many mountains in play. I think we're running 28 of them. So yeah, Spawn of Thraxus, just keep re-copying it with Feldon, and just keep zodding things for the amount of mountains we control, and then attack with our 5/5 flying artifact dragon. Sounds great. But for another Theros experience, maybe Terror of Mount Velis. 5 and double red for a 5/5 flying dragon. Again, we've seen it before. But the Terror of Mount Velis has double strike, and when it enters, all of our other creatures gain double strike until end of turn. So if we're making copies of Terror of Mount Velis every turn, then all of our creatures have double strike on each of our turns, or each of the turns that we have the Terror of Mount Velis enter. If we wanted to do this, I suppose, on an opponent's turn, thanks to Feldon. So lots and lots of extra damage from the Terror, and at the very least, we can attack with a 5/5 flying double strike. It's pretty good. Yidaro Wandering Monster is next. 5 and double red for an 8/8 legendary dinosaur turtle. Look at that face. With trample and haste, and cycling for 1 and a red. So if we can pay 7 mana, we can get out our 8/8 dinosaur turtle. If we can get Yidaro into our graveyard, we can pay 3 mana for an 8/8 trample or dinosaur turtle. That sounds great. But we can also cycle Yidaro, which means Yidaro's in our hand, we pay 1 and a red, discard Yidaro, and draw a card. But wait, Yidaro has a trigger that happens when we cycle it, which means we pay the 1 and a red and discard Yidaro, and the cycling trigger goes on the stack, and then this trigger will go on the stack above the cycling trigger, so this will resolve first. Whenever we cycle Yidaro, we shuffle Yidaro into our library from our graveyard, and then we get to draw our card. But if this is the 4th time we've done that, if we've cycled a card named Yidaro Wandering Monster 4 or more times this game, instead of shuffling Yidaro in, we put Yidaro onto the battlefield. So that means cycling Yidaro does draw us a card, and that card might be Yidaro again, since this ability will trigger before we draw from cycling. We're going to shuffle Yidaro in. So that means every time we cycle Yidaro, we're just getting a card in our hand, since Yidaro is not going to stay in our graveyard for us to reanimate with Feldon. So is this a problem? No, it's not. Because what we can do is this. Let's say we cycle Yidaro, 1 and a red, discard Yidaro. The cycling trigger goes on the stack for us to draw a card, And this ability triggers as well, going above our cycling trigger. So this is about to resolve. In response to this trigger, we activate Feldon, because Yadaro is still in our graveyard at this point. We can activate Feldon and make a copy of Yadaro in play right away. That Yadaro, of course, is an 8/8 trampling haste dinosaur turtle with a mana value of 5 and double red. After doing that, we then let this ability resolve. We'll shuffle Yadaro, the original, from our graveyard back into our library. It doesn't matter that that card isn't in our graveyard anymore. We've already made the copy of it. Finally, the cycling trigger resolves and we draw a card. So we're up. We spent 5 mana to draw a card and put an 8/8 trampler into play with haste. That at the end of turn we're gonna sacrifice, but that's how it works with Feldon anyway. So yeah, Yadaro tricks are a lot of fun in this deck. Next is Bosch, Iron Golem. Really great in this deck. 8 generic mana for a 6/7 legendary artifact creature golem with trample that has this ability. For 3 and a red and sacrifice an artifact, Bosch can fling it. Bosch will deal damage equal to the mana value of that artifact to any target. So Bosch is a great example of ways for us to get value out of the artifact creatures that Feldon makes without us just having them go to the graveyard because they're sacrificed to Feldon's delayed trigger at the end of the turn. So it's a lot of mana to think about. You know, Bosch is in play. We use Feldon for 3 mana to make a copy of something. That something comes into play, we attack with it. Maybe it survives combat, and then after combat, or maybe even during combat, if it looks like it's going to die and we'd rather do this, we pay 3 and a red, sacrifice it to Bosch, and Bosch will do its mana value in damage to any target. So we've spent 3 and a red here and 2 and a red from Feldon. That's 7 mana, but it's 7 mana to get a big creature, maybe attack with it, and then do its mana value in damage directly to anything. This might be us doubling the amount of damage it did to an opponent's face. That's pretty great. And consider this. It does not say sacrifice another artifact, because Bosch is an artifact, but would be one anyway if we made a copy of it with Feldon. So Bosch is in our graveyard. We activate Feldon for 3. Bosch comes in as a 6/7 trample. We attack with Bosch, and either during or after combat, we pay this mana and sacrifice Bosch. And Bosch will do 8 damage, because that's its mana value, to any target. And we can do that again every turn. 7 mana every turn to do 8 damage anywhere we want, and have a 6/7 trampling attacker in the process. Not terrible. Next, it's one of those Eldrazi I mentioned. It's Ulamog's Crusher. 8 generic mana for an 8/8 Eldrazi with Annihilator 2, which means whenever it attacks, the defending player has to sacrifice 2 permanents of their choice. They can sacrifice tokens, or they can sacrifice lands, or anything else in between, but they have to sacrifice 2 things as long as they have 2 permanents in play. And the Crusher attacks each combat if able. Of course it's going to attack. That's why we have it in the deck. I guess we could bring it out to block on an opponent's turn, thanks to Feldon making a copy of it, but the idea of just being pre-combat, spending 2 and a red, tapping Feldon, making an 8/8 Annihilator 2 with haste that has to attack, yeah, that's the kind of game I want to play. Next we have Triplicate Titan. This is a little bit of a take on Wormcoil Engine, in a sense. For 9 mana, we get a 9/9 artifact creature golem with flying, vigilance, and trample, and when it dies, it makes 3 3/3 colorless golem artifact creatures. 1 with flying, 1 with vigilance, 1 with trample. So same thing as with Wormcoil Engine, if we're making copies of the Triplicate Titan using Feldon, when those copies die, we get the 3 tokens. They just come in. Then we make another copy of the Triplicate Titan next turn, and we get more copies when that one dies. Or more tokens when that one dies. Just clogging up our board with all these little golems doing whatever we need. Flying in to attack, attacking vigilantly and blocking as well, trampling, whatever we want. Seems good. Ancient Stone Idol is a little similar to that as well. So this is a 12/12 artifact creature golem for 10 generic mana. But it has flash, and it costs 1 less for each attacking creature. That doesn't mean, we can do it this way. We can attack with our creatures, and then flash in the idol before the end of combat for cheaper. But usually the idea is, if an opponent attacks us, we flash in the idol, and it costs less, because it doesn't say for each attacking creature you control. So if an opponent attacks us with 10 creatures or more, the idol is free. In addition, it doesn't say creature attacking you. which means opponent A could attack with 5 creatures and attack opponent B and not attack us at all. And we can still flash in the Ancient Stone Idol as long as it's before that player's second main phase, while it's still during combat. And if they're attacking with 5 creatures, well, we only have to pay 5 to flash this in. It'll just sit there and be a 12/12 trample. Oh, it has trample. Did I mention? It has trample. And when it dies, it leaves behind a 6/6 construct with trample as well. Or 6/12, rather. So being able to make copies of the Stone Idol at instant speed, we could already do that with Feldon. Feldon can already make copies at instant speed. But when it dies, it leaves behind a 6/12, which is a terrific blocker, and it tramples, so it's a pretty good attacker too. Love the Idol. Next to last is our Greater Gargaron. This is a really fun one in this deck. 10 mana, 9 and a red for a 9/7 beast with no evasive abilities. However, we can suspend it for a single red. Suspend means, while it's in our hand, we pay this red mana, and we put this Gargadon in exile with 10 time counters on it. Then at the start of our upkeep, we remove a time counter, and when we remove the last one, we cast the Gargadon for free, and it has haste. So we can either pay 10 and get a 9/7, or pay 1 and in 10 turns get a 9/7. Except that it also has this ability. We can sacrifice an artifact, creature, or land to remove a time counter from it, but only if it's suspended. So that means we pay 1 red for the Gargadon, and for the next, maybe up to 10 turns, we have a free sacrifice outlet for artifacts, creatures, and lands, I suppose. We're not really looking to sacrifice lands in this deck, but sacrificing artifacts, we always have an artifact or creature to sacrifice, assuming we've made a copy using Feldon. So being able to sacrifice those before the end step and the delayed trigger from Feldon's ability sacrifices them for us anyway, gives us a way to power out our Gargadon faster. In addition, since we can sacrifice artifacts and creatures at instant speed, we could have the Gargadon come out on an opponent's turn. I believe that's how Suspend works. I don't think that Suspend can only be cast can only happen during your upkeep. So it's just whenever the last counter is removed. So yeah, seems like this would be pretty fun, and it gets us something really big. In addition, if this goes to our graveyard, however it may be, maybe it dies in combat, maybe we discard it, doesn't matter, we could always bring it back with Feldon, bring back a copy of it, and it's just a 9/7 vanilla at that point, but 9/7 will still get some work done. Last of all in this section is Pathrazor of Ulamog. 11 generic mana for a 9/9 Eldrazi with Annihilator 3. We've already talked about Annihilator, but Annihilator 3 is backbreaking. And the Pathrazor can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. So that's super menace. It's pretty good in terms of evasion. Just seems really nice to be able to spend 3 mana to make a copy of this, attack our opponent, they have to sacrifice 3 things, and if they have sacrificed too many creatures, then they don't have enough creatures to block, and we get in for 9. And we'll do it again next turn too. So that covers all of our big ones. These are the cards that we want to make copies of with our commander and be able to get in and get value from them and swing. But how do we get them in the graveyard? Well, we have a whole graveyard section to talk about why, or talk about how. We're going to start with Faithless Looting. I know not everyone loves this art. I think it's wonderful. This is a 1-red sorcery that says draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. So it's not card advantage, but it kind of is in this deck. It gives us access to 2 new cards, and we can discard cards that we can just make copies of with Feldon. So they're not gone for us. So we might have come out ahead. Worst case scenario, we got some pretty nice card selection for just 1 red mana. And we can flash it back, meaning we can cast it from our graveyard and then exile it during resolution for 2 and a red. So we can do it again. Next is Lightning Axe. Terrific removal in this deck. A single red mana for an instant that does 5 damage to target creature. All we have to do is discard a card in addition to it. Or, we can pay 5 more, so it's a total of 6 mana, which maybe we're willing to do later on in the game. But early on, just getting one of our biggest creatures into the graveyard from our hand by just paying a red and doing 5 damage to something means it looks like 2 creatures have gone to the graveyard, our opponent's and ours, but ours is going to come back over and over and over thanks to Feldon. Collector's Vault. I really like this card from Wilds of Eldraine. 2 generic mana for an artifact that we can pay 2 and tap to draw a card and discard a card, so it's entombed, it's getting into our graveyard, and we make a treasure token in the process. So we're getting a little bit of a rebate for the 2 we spent on it. And that card selection is always nice. Demand Answers is next. 1 and a red for an instant that says, as an additional cost, sacrifice an artifact or discard a card, and then draw 2 cards. So this is very relevant in our deck. We can use this if we have no other way, or no other reason, I should say, to sacrifice the artifact creatures that Feldon is making during our end step, or before our end step, before that end step trigger resolves, I should say, that would sacrifice those copies. We just cast Demand Answers and sacrifice it ourselves, and we just get to draw 2 cards. And if we don't want to do that, we can discard a big creature. That's good for us too, and then draw 2. I like Demand Answers. I'm a little sad that it is a power-crept version of Thrill of Possibility, because Thrill of Possibility was originally printed in Throne of Eldraine, and that's my favorite set, so meh, but still very good, and incredible, incredible art. Next is Burnished Heart. I love this card. 3 generic mana for a 2/2 artifact creature elk. It's an elk. Look at this elk. For 3 generic mana, we can sacrifice it and double Rampant Growth. Search our library for up to 2 basics, put them on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. In another deck, we could get 2 basics of different types, but in this deck we only have mountains, so we're going to get 2 mountains from it. The normal trick with Burnished Heart is you cast it for 3, you have it be in play, you don't have to attack with it, you just wait until your opponent attacks. Then you block with it, and as long as what you're blocking doesn't have trample, you can sack the elk in response, and the attacking creature is still blocked, and you get to do your elk stuff. What's nice is, once the Burnished Heart is in the graveyard, either because we discarded it, or it died in combat, or we sacrificed it, paying this 6 mana to get 2 basics into play, we can do it over and over, because we pay 2 and a red from Feldon, make a copy of the heart, and then do our trick. Whenever we're doing this, on our turn, on someone else's turn, doesn't matter. And before we have to sacrifice it to the delayed trigger of the Feldon ability, we just pay 3 and sacrifice it to its ramp ability. And we're good there too. 6 mana over the course of a turn cycle to get 2 lands into play seems expensive. But being able to do it repeatably is very powerful, and it's very good even if we're willing to, because we are willing to pay a little bit more mana than you would normally would, since we're not in green, we're in mono red. Burnished Heart's excellent. Next up is Mishra, Excavation Prodigy, which is in the deck for a particular reason, which we will get to at the end of the list of all of our spells. Mishra, Excavation Prodigy, this is Teenage Mishra, very young. 2 and a red for a legendary human artificer. Mishra's a 2/1 and has haste. Mishra, if we pay 1 and tap him and discard a card, we can draw a card, so we can get a little bit of rummaging going on here. Nice way to get things into the graveyard and maybe get something better. But however, whenever you discard 1 or more artifact cards, you add 2 red mana, but only once each turn. So if the card we discarded to Mishra's ability was an artifact, we get 2 red mana, and we only paid 1 for that, so we're up a mana, and it's red. This will trigger, however, anytime we discard 1 or more artifact cards. It doesn't have to be Mishra's ability, just once each turn. So this is a good way for us to get things to our graveyard, a good way to draw cards, and at the very least, to be paid off for discarding things, as long as we're discarding artifacts. And we can use that mana to reduce the cost of Feldon's activated ability from 2 in a red to just 1 generic mana. Pretty good. Next is Quicksmith Genius. 2 in a red for a 3/2 human artificer that just has an artifact fall trigger. Whenever an artifact we control enters, we can discard a card, and if we do, we draw a card. This is a May, so we don't have to do this. If we don't want to get cards out of our hand, we don't have to. But as long as we've had an artifact enter, which we're going to basically every turn, because Feldon is going to make copies of our creatures in our graveyard, which will enter as artifacts, that will trigger the Genius, and if we want to discard one, we can, and if we do, we draw. Pretty good. Next is Big Score from Streets of New Capenna. Love this card. I really have a soft spot for New Capenna. 3 in a red for an instant that says, as an additional cost, discard a card, so that's getting cards in our graveyard. Draw 2 cards, make 2 treasures. Pretty good. So it's a 2 mana rebate, and we get those 2 cards, in addition to this being just a Thrill of Possibility. So yeah. Next we have Duretti Scrap Savant. This is Duretti before he lost his spark on the plane of Fiora, I believe. City of Fiora? Plane of Fiora? I think that's right. Duretti is a 3 in a red, 3 loyalty planeswalker, Duretti, that has 3 loyalty abilities that are all excellent. +2, discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards. So we get to do a little bit of rummaging. It's pretty good. -2, to sacrifice an artifact, and if we do, we return an artifact from our graveyard to the battlefield, so we get to reanimate artifacts by sacrificing artifacts. That means whatever we were going to lose anyway, because it was a token copy created by Feldon, we can just get rid of it and get any artifact in our graveyard back onto the battlefield. Or, and it's because this is so useful, it's not that likely that we're going to get up to 10 loyalty, but if we can ultimate to ready, we get an emblem that says whenever an artifact is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. This is not a terrible ability, but in our deck, most of the time, our artifacts are going to the graveyard because we've either discarded them, which doesn't trigger here anyway, or they're going to the graveyard from the battlefield because they were token copies, so we can't return to them anyway since the token goes to the graveyard and is just annihilated by state-based actions. So we're here to get card selection, put cards in our graveyard, and as much as we can, sack artifacts to get better artifacts back onto the battlefield. Sack the artifacts that were going to be sacrificed anyway, that is. That's what Duretti's here to do. Next is Trading Post. Really like this card. 4 generic mana for an artifact that has 4 abilities that are all pay 1 and tap it and do something else to get something else. The do something else for the first ability is discard a card, so it lets us put things in our graveyard. And if we do, we gain 4 life. Yeah, that's fine. If we want to pay 1 of those life, we can make a goat. Sometimes you need a goat so your opponent can get your goat. I guess that's nice. We can also sacrifice a creature. Ooh, that's a little bit nicer because we're making creature copies every turn with Feldon to return an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. That's not as good as 2 of the battlefield, the way that Duretti did, but it's also not costing us loyalty to do it. And if we sacrifice an artifact, which remember, all of our creature copies that Feldon makes are artifacts, we draw a card. So Trading Post, at the very least, we make a copy of something with Feldon, we use it however we want that turn, probably attacking with it, and whenever we're ready, before it's sacrificed to the delayed trigger, we pay 1 and tap Trading Post and sacrifice it, and we just turn it into card draw. Really great. We've seen Duretti Rocketeer Engineer, and how he can let us sacrifice artifacts, which of course puts them in the graveyard. Ox of Agonis has us discard our hand, which puts things in the graveyard. Perforos lets us sacrifice the creature that we sneak attacked out at the end step, which of course gets it in the graveyard. Combustible Gear Hulk. If our opponent doesn't let us draw 3 cards, we are milling 3, so that's things in our graveyard. Oliphant and Rune Grinder are both mountain cyclers, so they'll put themselves in the graveyard. The same is true for Carnosaur. We can discard it, and it goes to the graveyard in order for us to do 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Dragon Mage, if it hits an opponent, everyone wheels and draws 7. And Yadaro doesn't maybe stay in the graveyard when we cycle it, but we can sure put him there, and to do that trick that we described earlier. So that covers all of our cards that are tagged graveyard, and that's basically our whole game plan. We have a number of cards that will supplement that game plan in interesting ways, but before we get to those, I want to talk about the cards that are supporting our game plan, starting with Card Advantage. As usual, I have tagged these cards draw. It doesn't mean that all these cards draw cards for us, it just means we are getting some kind of access to more cards than we had before. Some of them aren't strict card advantage, such as Faithless Looting. We're drawing 2, but we're also discarding 2. But in this deck, it is a little bit of card advantage because the cards we're discarding, we may be able to get access to using Feldon's ability. So just to remember, this is a section that gives us advantage, but really just access to more cards. That's pretty great. Skull Clamp is next, and it is wonderful. 1 generic mana for an equipment that equips for 1. It gives our equipped creature +1 and -1. So if we put this on a creature with a toughness of just 1, or that has an amount of damage marked on it that is equal to 1 less than its toughness, then as soon as we equip it, it will die when state-based actions are checked. But that's okay, because however it dies, when the equipped creature dies, we draw 2 cards. So Skull Clamp is in this deck primarily for us to do this. We activate Feldon pre-combat. We make a copy of some big creature in our graveyard. We spend 1 more mana to equip the clamp to that creature. The creature is big enough that it doesn't die from the toughness penalty, but it gets a little bit more power, which may be relevant, but we don't really care. Because at any point in the rest of the turn, if that creature dies from combat, from us sacrificing it for value, from us sacrificing it to its end step trigger, whatever it may do, when it dies, we've drawn 2 cards. So essentially, Feldon now costs 3 in a red rather than 2 in a red, but includes when that creature dies, draw 2 cards, because we're going to Skull Clamp everything. Pretty nice. Collector's Vault, of course, lets us draw and discard. Demand Answers lets us draw 2 when it resolves. Mishra lets us discard in order to draw. Monument to Endurance is next. You've seen from our graveyard section, we have an awful lot of things that discard cards. Monument to Endurance is payoff for that. For 3 generic mana, we get an artifact that says whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. So we get to choose the same thing over and over as long as it's not on the same turn. We either draw a card, make a treasure, or make all of our opponents lose 3 life. Most of the time in this deck, you'd think it would be draw a card, but a lot of the time it's just making treasures. We just need more mana because so many of our things are big, and the loop for this deck is getting Feldon out, getting a bunch of our big creatures into our graveyard, and using Feldon to make copies of them as we increase our mana base so that eventually on our turns we can activate Feldon, make copies of things, and also play big things by spending mana on them. So accelerating ourselves with Monument to Endurance is pretty great. But until we get to that point, or once we are at that point even, we can just draw cards with it. And if we've done both of these already and we are discarding more cards, we can have everyone lose 3 life. For example, maybe we've done combat damage with Dragon Mage, and we discard our entire hand, which was 3 cards, which means we'll get to trigger this as many times as the number of cards we discarded. We can't get more value from it than 3, one of each of these, but if we get all 3, that's pretty good too. So Quicksmith Genius lets us draw a card if we discard a card when we get Artifact Fall. Atsushi makes it so that when it dies, if we choose the first mode, we can exile the top 2 of our library and play them until the end of our next turn. That's access to more cards, so it's card advantage. Big Score, of course, lets us draw 2 cards. Duretti gives us the ability to discard up to 2 and draw that many, so same idea. But next we have Industrial Advancement. This one's so much fun. It's so cool in this deck. 3 in a red for an enchantment that says, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice a creature. Well, we're usually going to have one thanks to Feldon. If you do, look at the top X cards of your library where X is that creature's mana value. Don't worry that these creatures that Feldon makes are tokens. Tokens that are copies of another card still retain that card's mana cost, so they have a mana value. If we were to make a copy using Feldon of Atsushi, that copy will still say 2 and double red at the top, even though we can't cast it since it's already on the battlefield. Which means if we were to sacrifice it to Industrial Advancement, sacrifice it, we get to look at the top 4 cards of our library because that was the mana value of Atsushi. And then, when we do that, we can put a creature card from among those cards we looked at on the battlefield and put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Notice, it does not say you may put a creature from among them with mana value X or less onto the battlefield. So if we sacrifice a Burnished Heart with mana value 3, and one of the 3 cards we look at is an Elder Gargadon, or Greater Gargadon, that's a 10 mana spell. We can go ahead and put it on the battlefield if we want. As long as it's in the number of cards that we looked at, we can just put a creature onto the battlefield. We're not going to whiff with this that often, especially because the creatures we're sacrificing are usually themselves quite big because they're the things we've made copies of with Feldon. And this Industrial Advancement, once we've cast it, it just sits on the battlefield doing this for us every turn. This is a way for us to get inevitability in this deck. It's really nice. So, next is another Planeswalker. It's Koth of Fire of Resistance. 2 and double red for a 4 loyalty Koth Planeswalker that has 3 abilities, all of which are awesome. I would probably pay this much just to get this first ability every turn. So for +2 loyalty, we Lay of the Land for a mountain. We search our library for a basic mountain, put it in our hand after we reveal it, and shuffle. So it guarantees we're going to hit our land drop every single turn. And as long as Koth is on the battlefield, we've got 28 mountains in this deck. If we go through all of them, I'm going to be stunned. But Koth lets us always find more mountains and always be able to put them in play. That's great. Well, of course, we put them in play as our land drop, not as part of Koth's ability, but Koth makes it so we have it in our hand in order to put it in play. Then, for -3, Koth deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. First ability helps with that, but this is just straight up good removal for creatures. A lot of the times, we're going to be doing 10 or more damage to our opponent's creatures. It's pretty good. And if we get up to 7 loyalty, which is not hard to do, we get an emblem with whenever a mountain you control enters, this emblem deals 4 damage to any target. That's just mountains have an enters trigger, like, essentially. We have Mountain Fall, do 4 damage to any target. That can go face, that can kill creatures. Yeah, imagine having this in play and then cracking a Burnished Heart twice in the turn, because we crack it once, make a copy of it, then crack it again, assuming we have enough mana, which we probably will by this point, and just getting 16 straight damage to anything. Just seems amazing. Koth is really great in this deck. Next, we have Solemn Simulacrum. Of course, it enters and rampant growths us, but it dies, which it will do plenty of times in the game if we are making copies of it with Feldon, and we can draw cards. Trading Post, as we've seen before, lets us draw cards when we sacrifice artifacts. Clone Shell lets us put a creature into play, assuming we found one on the top 4 when it entered and imprinted it. Ilarg lets us put a creature into play tapped and attacking, even though we get to bounce it. That's us getting value from a card that was in our hand without having to pay for it. So that's a pretty good advantage. Ox of Agonis lets us discard our hand and draw 3. Perforos lets us do something similar to Ilarg, in the sense that we can put a red creature card or an artifact creature card into play for just 3, and we sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. That's just bonus. Mightstone and Weakstone is next. This is a little bit sad thematics from the Brothers' War, considering this is a Feldon deck, but we're going with it. For 5 generic mana, we have a legendary artifact, Power Stone. We'll talk about the Power Stone part in a moment. When it enters, we choose to either draw 2 or target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. So the Mightstone and Weakstone is expensive, but it's a divination or a good removal spell. Both of those are excellent for us. But also, it taps for 2 colorless mana that can't be spent to cast non-artifact spells. This is Power Stone mana. That's what I was mentioning before. What that means is, if we use this 2 mana to cast a spell, that spell has to be an artifact. Otherwise, we can't use this mana on the spell. If we use this mana for any other purpose, no restrictions on it. If we use this mana to activate an ability, such as Feldon's ability, normally we'd be tapping 3 lands, let's say, to activate Feldon. With the Mightstone and Weakstone in play, we tap a mountain and this, and it activates Feldon. That's great. Or if we use this to pay for additional costs. Let's say we are targeting something that has a ward on it. We can use this mana to pay for ward. Let's say someone has a Smothering Tithe or a Rhystic Study in play. We can use this mana to pay for those triggers. As long as we're not using this mana on spells, we can use it however we like. If we are using it on spells, those spells have to be artifact spells. But luckily, there's 28 other cards in the deck that are artifacts. Pretty good. We've seen the Gear Hulk. Gear Hulk probably draws us 3 cards at some point. If not the first time, then maybe the second, third, or fourth. Itali lets us cast spells off the top of our library and everyone else's when Itali attacks, so that's pretty good. Oliphant lets us Mountain Cycle, as does Rune Grinder, which both put a card in our hand, even if it's just a basic mountain. Trumpeting Carnosaur lets us discover 5. That is us finding a spell and casting it without paying its mana cost, or just putting it on our hand, both of which are advantage. Dragon Mage, of course, lets us wheel, so drawing 7 sounds pretty good. And Yidaro lets us cycle, so we can draw 1 from there. So that covers all of our card advantage spells. Let's look now at our acceleration, which again I've just tagged as a shorthand as ramp. Starting with the Soul Ring, everyone knows Soul Ring. It costs 1, taps for 2, star of the format, and the symbol of it as well. Great card, gotta run it. Another almost auto-include is Arcane Signet, even in our monocolor deck. For 2 generic mana, it's an artifact that comes in untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. So it taps for red. So a 2 mana rock that taps for red, we're willing to run that. In fact, we're willing to run Fire Diamond, which is the same thing in our deck, except it enters tapped. Even though it's slower than the Arcane Signet, it's a 2 mana rock that taps for red. It's totally worth it for accelerating us. We've already seen the Collector's Vault. It makes treasures for us as part of drawing and discarding. Now we're running Bender's Waterskin. I'm really excited about this new card, especially in this deck, because it just seems so much fun. It's a Manalith, which means it's a 3 mana artifact that comes in untapped and taps for 1 mana of any color. But it also says, untap it during each other player's untap step. So this really empowers our ability to activate Feldon on our opponent's turns. If we're able to use this for mana on our turn, maybe just to cast a spell of some sort, or even if we're activating Feldon, maybe we get a way to untap Feldon. We can do it again on someone else's turn. But usually, we use this on a spell on our turn, if we're not using Feldon then, and then on someone else's turn, we can use this for mana for Feldon as well. And even if we're not doing that, we have some instants in this deck. Not that many, 4, but we can sure use the Bender's Waterskin mana on those because it will untap every untap step. Pretty neat. We've seen the Burnished Heart and how it will double Rampant Growth us when we sack it to its ability. Next we have Cursed Mirror. This is 2 and a red for an artifact that taps for red, comes in untapped, and when it enters, if we want, we can have it become a copy of any creature on the battlefield until end of turn, except that it has haste. So if we really like, we can play this as a clone. It just only counts as a clone this turn. So maybe we make a copy of something really big and scary in our graveyard using Feldon's ability, then play the Cursed Mirror. This comes in as a copy of that, and we can use it to attack or do whatever else it does. And assuming it survives, at the end of turn, it will revert to just a artifact that taps for red. The only thing I do want to mention is that if this comes in and we want it to be a copy of a creature, that creature will have haste, but it will not be able to tap for red. This will replace that otherwise. We've seen Mishra. Mishra can give us a little tiny bit of ramp whenever we discard things, adds 2 red. So if we didn't use Mishra's ability to discard, we're adding just 2 red. If we did, we're adding 2, but it cost us 1, so we're up 1 anyway. We've seen Monument to Endurance. It lets us make treasure. That's a good way to accelerate. But we also have Patriarch's Seal. Really great here. 3 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 1 of any color, so it's a manalith. But we can also pay 1 and tap it to untap target legendary creature we control, which means we can use this to untap Feldon and use Feldon a second time on our turn, or another time on that turn cycle. Maybe we activate Feldon our turn, make something big, attack with it, pass the turn, and on someone else's turn, when they attack us, we use Patriarch's Seal to untap Feldon, then activate Feldon and bring a copy of something big from our graveyard onto the battlefield to block in combat. Or, I don't know, get a Rune Grinder trigger, or a Combustible Gearholt trigger, whatever we want to do here. Patriarch's Seal gives us mana if we need it, but gives us access to using our commander again, and that's much more valuable. Atsushi, of course, can, when it dies, make 3 treasures for us. Big Score makes 2 treasures as part of its resolution. Sad Robot enters and Rampant Growths us, and the Mind Stone and Weak Stone can tap for 2 Power Stone mana. All of our acceleration. Next is our interaction section, which is right here. Again, just shorthand tagged as removal. Lightning Axe, of course, does 5 damage to a creature, and it also helps us get cards in our graveyard. Pretty good. We're running Lightning Bolt. We're a red deck, so we should run Lightning Bolt. It's 1 red mana for an instant that does 3 damage to any target. It's one of the best from the Boon cycle. We love Lightning Bolt. Run Lightning Bolt. You're playing red, come on. So Koth is great because Koth lets us -3 to do damage to a creature based on the number of mountains we control. Mind Stone and Weak Stone can enter and do -5/-5 to a creature we control. Duplicate just exiles a non-token creature when it enters. Inferno Titan comes in and does 3 damage divided among 1, 2, or 3 targets. Trumpeting Carnosaur, we can discard it and play, with cost of 2 and a red to do 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker. But what about Warstorm Surge? This card really overperforms in this deck. For 5 and a red, we get an enchantment that says, whenever a creature we control enters, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. We are constantly bringing big creatures into play, whether we've cast them or made a copy of them using Feldon. We get something with 8 power, 9 power, 10 power, whatever our power may be. It's big. Warstorm Surge lets that creature enter and do its damage, its power and damage to any target. So we can remove planeswalkers or creatures, or we can just go face with it. It's terrific. It's sort of the daddy version of Impact Tremors. But what's especially nice is the creature deals the damage with Warstorm Surge, which means if we have something like Wormcoil Engine, it will enter and it will trigger Warstorm Surge, and the Wormcoil Engine will do the damage to any target, meaning that damage is Death Touch damage and is lifelink damage. So we're going to gain the 6 life off of it, and we're going to get to kill anything that's not indestructible that we've targeted with it, assuming it was a creature. The same is true for the Wormcoil Engine tokens that enter, because Warstorm Surge doesn't only trigger on non-token creatures. So we'll get our little baby Wormcoil engines. One of them will be Death Touch, so we can just kill something with Warstorm Surge's trigger, and the other one will gain us 3 life from the lifelink. Pretty sweet. Dracoseth spreads around 10 damage between 3 targets every time it attacks. That's pretty good removal. Meteor Golem can remove anything that isn't a land when it enters, assuming it isn't, of course, indestructible. Bosch lets us fling artifacts based on their mana value. Ulamog's Crusher and Pathraiser of Ulamog both have Annihilator, which is not quite the same thing as targeted removal, but still pretty good. So that covers all of our support cards, except for our Wraths. Can't forget the Wraths. So we've seen Balefire Dragon. If it does combat damage, it does that same amount of damage to all the creatures that the player that it damaged controls. Pretty good. But we're also running Blasphemous Act. 8 and a red for a sorcery that deals 13 damage to each creature. This sure does kill Feldon, but it probably kills everything else too. And Blasphemous Act costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield. Does not say each creature you control. So this means if there are 8 creatures on the battlefield, Blasphemous Act costs 1 red. Great way to reset things, especially because a lot of our game, especially until we get to the late game, looks like us having Feldon and 1 or 2 creatures every turn, since Feldon is just bringing a creature out from the graveyard in the form of a copy, and then that goes away. We don't typically get to maintain a really big board of creatures. So if it looks like we're sliding toward maybe not being able to keep doing what we're doing, Blasphemous Act can usually level the playing field pretty nicely. So that covers our Wraths. Let's go now to our supplemental categories. Starting with outlets. These are sacrifice outlets, ways for us to sacrifice the things that we already have for value. For example, Demand Answers does let us discard a card, but we can also sacrifice an artifact, which is usually the artifact creature copy that we've made using Feldon's ability. Duretti lets us sacrifice an artifact to reanimate an artifact from our graveyard. Pretty good. Industrial Advancement, we've already talked about how great it is, letting us sacrifice creatures to it. They don't have to be artifacts, but they can be, as long as they're creatures as well. Trading Post lets us sacrifice creatures to regrow artifacts, or artifacts to draw cards. Duretti lets us sacrifice artifacts to reanimate artifacts from our graveyard. Bosch lets us sacrifice artifacts to fling using their mana value at any target. And Greater Gargaron lets us sacrifice artifacts, creatures, or lands, which we probably won't do, but maybe, in order to power it out faster from Suspend. So those are our outlets. Let's talk now about our payoffs. These are cards that give us value for doing things we were already going to do. So I'm going to talk about the one we haven't seen yet last. Skull Clamp gives us value when our creatures die. We're having creatures die every turn thanks to the sacrifice trigger on the clones that Feldon makes. Mishra, we're going to be doing a lot of discarding anyway, so Mishra gives us 2 extra red mana at least once every turn that we do that. Monument to Endurance, like I mentioned, it gives us a payoff of a card draw, a treasure, or each opponent losing 3 life whenever we discard a card, even if we've done it multiple times in the turn. Quicksmith Genius lets us rummage every time our artifacts enter, and we're having a lot of artifacts enter thanks to Feldon. And because we're having so many artifact creatures enter, and creatures in general, Warstorm Surge is letting us spread out a bunch of damage based on their power every time they come in. Finally, Determined Iteration. This card is so much fun. I've been on this ever since the New Capenna Commander decks were released. It's just wonderful. For 1 and a red, we get an enchantment that says, at the beginning of combat on your turn, populate. The token created this way gains haste, sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Populating means making a token that's a copy of a creature token you control. So we need to have a creature token in play in order to populate, which means, since this triggers at the beginning of combat on our turn, we need to activate Feldon during our first main phase. Make a token copy, that is an artifact, of one of the creatures in our graveyard, and then we go to combat, Determined Iteration will trigger, and it will make a second one. That second one will gain haste and will sacrifice at the end step, so it's the same, essentially, as the token that Feldon made, because Feldons also have haste and are sacrificed at the end step. And since we're copying the token, this copy that we've populated will also be an artifact. So yeah, because types are copyable. So yeah, this is a nice way to say if we pay this 2 mana, as long as we activate Feldon pre-combat, we're getting an extra Feldon trigger, kind of, as long as it's the same thing. It's not really the same as an extra Feldon trigger, but Feldon's getting 2 things that we can attack with that turn. And it's very inexpensive for its value in our deck. Very nice. So speaking of other ways for Feldon to get triggers, now that we've covered our payoffs, let's look at our synergy cards. These are ways to, like I was saying, double up on those triggers. We have Patriarch Seal. We've already seen. It lets us pay 1 and tap it to untap Feldon, so we can use Feldon again. Next is Illusionist Bracers. This is an equipment that costs 2 and equips for 3, so 5 mana, a little expensive in the tempo of our deck, but worth it, because whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, which Feldon's ability is not, we copy that ability and we may choose new targets for the copy. Meaning, if we're willing to invest this 5 mana in casting and equipping this on Feldon, every time we then activate Feldon after that, we get 2 activations of Feldon's ability. That's so worth 5 mana. It's going to pay for itself over the course of 2 turns. As Feldon doesn't get removed, we're all set. Similarly is Rings of Brighthearth. Rings of Brighthearth is 3 generic mana for an artifact. It's not an equipment, but it says whenever you activate an ability, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 2 generic mana, and if you do copy that ability, you may choose new targets for the copy. So we can do this on any of our creatures that have activated abilities, as long as those abilities aren't mana abilities. But it costs us 2 every time. So this is cheaper earlier, but more expensive in the long run compared to Illusionist Bracers. But we might as well run both, because we can get more and more and more Feldon triggers. Pretty good. Finally, we have Battle Mage's Bracers. 2 and a red for an equipment that equips for 2, and it gives equipped creature haste, and it says whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, you may pay 1, and if you do, copy that ability, you may choose new targets for the copy. As you see, the Bracers are a combination of Rings of Brighthearth and Illusionist Bracers. Sort of. They're like a worse version of the Bracers? A better version? Hard to say. I mean, these bracers cost 2, and these bracers cost 2, and these cost 3, but these equip for 2, and these equip for 3, but you have to pay for this activated ability, but you don't have to pay for this ability. I think the Illusionist Bracers are better, but you might as well have this redundancy of the Battle Mage's Bracers, even if it means having to pay 1 more mana to just get a double activation. Pretty great. When we already have so many creatures in the deck that are doing good things for us, we can certainly double up on our Feldon triggers with these other 4 cards. So that covers our synergy section. Let's look now at how we are protecting ourselves. We've already seen Ancient Stone Idol and how it protects us because we can flash it in when we're being attacked and block really well. But we also have Swiftfoot Boots to protect Feldon specifically. For 2 generic mana, we get an equipment that equips for 1 and gives the equipped creature hexproof and haste. Haste could be nice. Maybe we get Feldon out later in the game. Maybe Feldon's been removed even. We recast Feldon, but we have 4 mana left over. So we can equip for 1, and then now that Feldon has haste, we can activate his tap ability to go ahead and use him right away. And when he does, he's got hexproof, as long as he's equipped with the boots. Love the Swifties. Next up, we have our recursion section. Ways to get things back from our graveyard in case we don't want to have them sit there. Duretti, of course, lets us reanimate artifacts by sacrificing an artifact for his -2. Other Duretti, the creature Duretti, lets us do basically the same thing. Sack an artifact and reanimate an artifact in our graveyard whenever this Duretti attacks or enters. And Trading Post lets us get creatures, or gets artifact rather, back from our graveyard to our hand if we are willing to sacrifice a creature. That covers our recursion. Let's talk now about our token section. Just ways to round out the fact that we've got 35 creatures in this deck, but we might as well have a few more. Determined Iteration makes a copy of any token we have, as long as it, at least for that turn, because it will gain haste and sacrifice itself at the end step, so we probably want to iterate and populate the tokens that Feldon is making, but we don't have to. Trading Post can make us a goat. That seems nice. Wormcoil Engine makes us 2 baby Wormcoil engines, a 3/3 with Death Touch and a 3/3 with Lifelink. Mirror Battlesphere makes 4 1/1 mirror artifact creature tokens every time it comes in. Triplicate Titan, like the Wormcoil engine, dies and leaves behind 3/3/3 golems, one with vigilance, one with trample, one with light flying. And of course the Ancient Stone Idol, when it dies, leaves behind a 6/12 trampling construct artifact creature token. That's our tokens. We have two last sections. First, we have extra damage. Terror of Mount Velis gives us extra damage because it gives all of our creatures double strike the turn it enters, and it of course has double strike itself. The fact that we can recur this by making more and more copies with Feldon means we can have lots and lots of double strike swinging in with all of our creatures. We're also running Mechanized Warfare. For 1 and double red, we have an enchantment that says if a red or artifact source, which is to say all but our Eldrazi, and including our Eldrazi, if they are copies made by Feldon, if one of those sources would deal damage, one of the sources we control, of course, would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent that an opponent controls, it deals 1 more than it would have. So Mechanized Warfare really adds up, especially for things like Drakoseth. It's not doing 4 and 3 and 3 damage, it's doing 5 and 4 and 4 damage. That's great. Even Lightning Bolt, with Mechanized Warfare out, is 1 red mana for 4 damage to any target. This is really great for its low cost. And now for the flavor section. We've seen Mishra. Mishra is in the flavor section because Mishra I've always thought of as the sort of little brat on Christmas Day who's not that excited about whatever he's been given. He doesn't care about the gift he already has, he cares about the gift he's getting. So he discards a card to draw a card, so it's sort of like a, I don't want this one, I want this one. And then finally, we have Gingerbread, which you have to have in the stack. Because Santa likes cookies. It's obvious. Gingerbread is 1 generic mana for a 1/1 artifact creature food golem with haste. Gingerbread being a food, we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to gain 3 life, which is a great way to put it in the graveyard if we want to. But we can also pay 1, and it can't be blocked except by creatures with haste this turn. So Gingerbread, pretty nice. We're not likely to bring this back with Feldon, but we sure could if we wanted, if we're desperate for life and we have just a surfeit of mana and nothing else to do with Feldon. We pay 3 with Feldon, bring the Gingerbread back, pay 2 more, tap and sack the Gingerbread and gain 3 life. That's 5 mana and using up our valuable commander's ability to gain 3 life, but we sure could. It's just, we probably ought not to. That's why I didn't put it in the graveyard section. So that covers all of our spells for now. I usually mention this at the top of my videos, but to mention now, this Moxfield list obviously is linked in the video's description, and at the bottom of the list, you will find a considering section. It's full of cards that I thought about putting in this deck and ultimately didn't, but you sure could if you want to build your own Feldon of the Third Path deck. It's a great place to get started for some inspiration, and they're all tagged the way that I have so that you know how I would put them in the deck if I were going to. Finally, we're going to look at our land base, as we always do. We're running 28 basic mountains, not much to say about that. I am, of course, running Brothers War Mountains. It's reasonable. We have 2 fixing lands, which are both actually ramp in this deck. So Temple of the False God, I know not everyone likes this card, but I think it's terrific. For a land that comes in untapped, it taps for soul mana, soul ring mana. It's a soul land. It's just we can't activate it unless we control 5 or more lands. So that means 4 lands other than the Temple of the False God. So if this is in our opening hand with just a basic mountain, and that's all we have, probably not worth keeping that hand. But if we get this into play as our 5th land or later, we're ahead of the curve. We've got 1 land drop here, and it's making 2 mana for us. Pretty nice. Similarly, Myriad Landscape enters tapped, and it makes 1 colorless mana, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic lands that share a land type. Not a problem in this deck since we only have mountains. Then we put those on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So even though this comes in tapped, and we have to pay mana into it, tap it, and sacrifice it, and the basics it finds, the mountains it finds, will come in tapped. This is us making 1 land drop and eventually having 2 lands in play for it, so it's a very, very slow form of ramp. Worth doing. Finally, we have 8 utility lands that we're running. Starting with Buried Ruin. Buried Ruin is a land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap it, and sack it to bring an artifact back from our graveyard to our hand. Just in case we want to get it out of the graveyard, maybe we have discarded due to being forced to by like Dragon Mage, for example, or we've discarded in another way by wheeling our hand, and we want to get back our Soul Ring or our Arcane Signet or something like that. Buried Ruin is a great way to trade a land for an artifact. Demolition Field. I don't typically run land removal, like land destruction in my decks. I know that people don't like it, and it's fair not to like it in Commander, but you have to have a little bit of targeted removal just in case someone plays something really problematic, like having a Voltron player with their, 2020 commander that they're attacking with, and they've got a Rogue's Passage that makes it unblockable. Or, I've mentioned in some of my other videos, I have a friend who runs Glacial Chasm. It's annoying. We need to stop people from doing this. So the answer is not asking them to change their decks, it's running something like Demolition Field. This is the land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls, and then they get to search their library for a basic and put it on the battlefield untapped and shuffle. And so do we. So neither player, our opponent or us, is down a land. We just have basics in play instead, and those basics are untapped. You can use them for mana right away. The only way we don't get a land for this is if we're out of basic lands, and that's not going to happen to us. Wouldn't be us. Next is Fountain Port. Fountain Port is a lot of utility for us. It comes in untapped and taps for colorless. We can pay 2 and tap it and sack a token to draw a card. That is every clone or every copy that our commander makes. So Fountain Port is in our land base as a way for us to sack our tokens and turn them into card advantage. We can pay 3 and tap and pay a life as well to make a 1/1 blue fish creature token. Probably not doing that in this deck, but sometimes you need a red deck blue fish. Do this twice, 1 fish, 2 fish, red deck, blue fish, I don't know. And then last, if we have extra mana laying around, which we almost never will, but we might, we can pay 4 and tap Fountain Port to make a treasure token and sort of bank that mana for later. Next is Gyre Reach Sanitarium. This is an untapped legendary land that taps for colorless, or we can pay 2 and tap it, and everyone draws a card and discards a card. Free loot for everyone. Pretty nice. Helps us more than everyone else usually. Next is Phyrexia's Core. A land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless. We can pay 1, tap, and sack an artifact to gain a life. This is not a very exciting card in this deck, but it is here as a way of us sacrificing our artifacts. If we really need a sack outlet, that's better than just losing our copies that Feldon makes at the end of turn. If we've got an extra mana lying around, we might as well gain 1 life off of it. Even 1 life is better than nothing. We've got that Rogue's Passage that we mentioned earlier. We're running this just because we have a lot of big creatures, and sometimes a big creature getting in unblockably is enough. It's a land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make one of our creatures unblockable this turn. But it doesn't actually say one of our creatures. We're not using this that often this way, or we're not doing the thing I'm about to say this very often. But Rogue's Passage can be used politically. We can say, hey look, opponent A, I know you want to attack opponent B, but you're afraid of being blocked. I will use Rogue's Passage to make your creature unblockable if you leave me alone for a turn cycle. And they say, okay, you go ahead and use it first. And we say, no. You declare it as an attacker first, and then we will use Rogue's Passage to make it unblockable. Otherwise, you can make it attack us. And they'll say, okay, that's fair. So it doesn't come up that often, but it's important to recognize when a card allows you to use it in a way that doesn't look like it's intended that way, because then you get a little bit more value out of it in these kind of edge cases. Spinerock Knoll is next. This is a land that comes in tapped, but it has Hideaway 4. Hideaway means when it enters, we look at the top 4 cards of our library, we exile 1 face down under the knoll, and we put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Spinerock Knoll, when it is untapped, it taps for red mana, but we can also pay a red and tap it to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. This is not hard for our deck to do, and so the idea of being able to do that much damage and then tap 2 lands, 1 for red and 1 that in the knoll itself, that is, and we get to just play this exiled card. So this is a free spell, essentially. I mean, it's costing us 2, essentially, in a way, but like free in a different way. And we just get to have it resolved that way. It also says play here. So if Spinerock Knoll hides away 4 lands, we can put a land under this, and if we haven't made our land drop earlier in the turn, we can do 7 damage to an opponent, pay a red, tap this, and we can play that exiled land. if we want to. It's also worth recognizing that none of this says at sorcery speed, so it doesn't require us to do the damage to an opponent. It just says if an opponent was dealt 7 or more damage this turn. So we can do this on opponent B's turn if opponent A or C or B even takes damage. As long as they've taken 7 or more in the turn that we activate this ability, then we're able to activate the ability. It doesn't matter where they took it from. Finally, we've got War Room, which I really like putting in most of my monocolored decks. But you don't have to. There's lots of better cards, especially if you want to not spend $8 on War Room. This is a land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, but we can also pay 3, tap it, and pay an amount of life equal to the number of colors in our commander's color identity, which is, in this deck, 1. And if we do, we draw a card. So for 4 mana, tapping 3 and tapping the War Room, and paying 1 life, we draw a card. We're usually not hurting for cards in this deck, but if we really need to, it's fine to have it here. We've got plenty of lands to make red for us. It's okay to have one here that usually will make only colorless, and if we really need land from it, we might as well take it. And that sums it up. Tune in next Monday for more of my usual Commander deck techs. Happy holidays, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.